Hello, everybody. I'm Katherine, Leung, the editor of Canto Cutie zine. Thank you so much for being here. This is our Volume 2 launch party. Our first launch party and our first zine came out on July 24th, 2020, and that zine looks like this. We had 11 artists represented at that party, and it's just grown since then. Now I'm really excited to present to you Volume 2. We have over 22 artists in the zine. The zine has grown from my little personal project to a really big international art collective with a following. We get messages saying that people feel seen, that they didn't know it was okay to be Cantonese, that, you know, people who are countryless, they feel like they have a home, at least in the art community. So that really motivates us to keep going. And like I said, Volume 2, we have 22 different artists represented from all over the world. The cover artists from Volume 1, Z Cam, they helped me edit Volume 2. We also have a translator for Volume 2, which is the reason why all the interviews are in perfect Cantonese. G was a translator that joined the team, and I'm really excited to show you their work today. And also a poet's from Volume 1, Raymond, he's back for Volume 2, and so that's exciting. Again, thank you so much for being here and supporting independent publishing. You can still pre-order Volume 2. It's just $20 a copy. This whole event is recorded, except for the end, and we'll talk more about that. At the end of the launch party, we'll have a conversation, and that won't be recorded. So I'm going to turn it over to Z, who will give us some opening remarks. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. This issue, we ran into some problems, obstacles because of the Hong Kong national security law. It's been very interesting to have to deal with those problems, and also still sticking true to presenting a zine with content that has integrity and allowing people to have a place to say what they want to say. Yeah, and Canto Cutie has grown into a thing that, you know, one person started, and now we have like 3 people working on it together, and it's just amazing. And I've been really proud to see everybody putting out their work and letting us like edit it and do follow-ups, and it's just great. It's grown into a community. I don't know what else to say, but yeah, let's just get started. Well, actually, I do want to say that we will have a bathroom break after the artist talk, before the discussion. So, yep.
Yeah, we just ask that you stay muted while artists are talking and while there are readings. There will be chances that you can ask questions to the artists and get answers. And you can, of course, participate in the chat. I will be answering, and I hope the artists will be answering too. And again, like Z said, after we have 5 presentations, we'll have a little break. I will stop recording the event, and we will have a discussion about Cantonese identity, and anyone can participate in that. So without further ado, the first artist we have is Annika Cheng. Annika is a featured artist from the zine. In Volume 2, we have an interview with her. She's a fiber artist from Queens, New York, currently studying at the Maryland Institute College of Arts. Annika's works tell a story of Cantonese identity as an Asian American, often through wearable pieces. And she also will share her musings of quarantine life here, and she does on social media. So Annika.
Hello, my name is Annika Cheng. Thank you for having me today. 大家好,我係張美佳. It's so nice to be here, and I'm glad we're here to talk about art and Cantonese identity. So the first thing I want to talk about is the start of quarantine, because I feel like that has affected my art practice a lot. I'm sure for many other artists out there, you feel similarly. But this was particularly significant for me because my dad got COVID early on in the pandemic. He's fine now, he's recovered, but it really made me think a lot about like being separated from my family, living in Baltimore, and what it means to be part of like a community and a culture and a family. So in this illustration, you can see that I drew a partition that my dad put up. It's a plastic sheet that linked his room to the bathroom, so he wouldn't have to interact with my mom while living in the same house. And that partition really made me think about boundaries, separation, being isolated, and what it means to be part of a community, specifically during an ongoing pandemic. So this is a piece I made in reaction to that feeling. It's called A Shell of a Mask. And as you can see, it's a vinyl material that I've folded into an origami shell. And it's thinking about this idea of being in a bubble of protection, but how that protection can also be isolating and incredibly scary and alone. And it's definitely me thinking through what it means to be separated from my culture, separated from my language, and separated from my family during this really tough pandemic. So in thinking more about what it means to be part of a community and part of a culture, I was talking to my mom about Hong Kong identity because my mom is from Hong Kong and moved here when she was younger. And we were reflecting on this idea that we both have this idea of Hong Kong that is a nostalgic place, something that is idyllic, something we both imagine it to be a certain way. But in reality, with the riots happening and the protests happening, the place that both of us remember is extremely different than the reality. So I made this piece in thinking about generational knowledge, generational remembrance, and generational nostalgia, and thinking about this place that we both wish we could be, but cannot go to. So you can see that this piece is made up of fabrics, and I chose this specific fabric because it's something my mom remembers wearing to her high schools and like the uniform she had to wear when she was living in Hong Kong. And there are embroidered locations in the piece, and as well as embroidered portraits of my mom's family, and thinking about what is passed down between generations, the knowledge of this place that I have from my mom, and the type of generational memories I have from my family that was in Hong Kong. So in thinking about myself as an extension of Chinese culture, I started to focus more on what it means to be a Chinese American person instead of just thinking about what it could be if I had grown up in Cantonese. I wanted to focus on like my now, what is happening now, and what it means to be Asian American. So this piece is titled Beautiful American Cheongsam. And if you don't know it, the cheongsam is a traditional garment worn often in Hong Kong. And it's very often seen as a form of female liberation because women were allowed to wear something that was more form-fitting, but the slit in the leg allowed for more movement. So it's an interesting garment in Cantonese history, but if you could go to the next slide. I was thinking about this garment that I used to wear when I was a little kid, and how when I was younger, the idea of Chinese identity was very innocent, because I remember I would always wear this garment and want to show off to everybody, like, look, I'm Chinese, like I'm Cantonese, I want to be proud of that. Everybody look at this beautiful garment that I'm allowed to wear because I'm Cantonese. But as I got older, I became more aware of the connotations of being a person of color living in America, and the connotations of this dress have shifted drastically since when I was growing up, or since I was a child. So I recreated the garment I would have worn when I was a little kid, as you can see on the left image. And then I cut it up and fit it to something that I could wear now. And when you look at this image, you'll see that the character May is put into the dress, questioning whether is this garment something that is really seen as beautiful now, or as seen in the characters for America, Mei Guo, or beautiful country, is it just something that has been made more American? And thinking about the ideas of appropriation and colonization and the fetishization of this garment by American culture, I made this garment and it's to call into question these ideas and to really think critically about how Chinese culture has been appropriated and taken by Americans, but also to question the ways that I am implicit in that colonization and implicit in that orientalization and fetishization of Chinese people. Yeah. So then in thinking about my own implication in the colonization of Chinese culture, I made these masks, which reference the tradition of the face change performance. I'm sure you've seen it. It's where somebody has a mask on their face and they'll quickly swish a cape over their face and their face will change. But these masks are always also used in traditional Beijing opera. And in that traditional Beijing opera, each of these colored masks has a certain meaning or certain character that they are assigned to. So red is often seen as loyal, white is often seen as a twisted enemy, and blue is the common bold man. But I made these masks in red, white, and blue to reference being American and what those colors can mean to both Chinese identity and American identity. So in thinking about these underlying meanings, Chinese Americans are often expected to be loyal to both America and their Chinese culture, but these identities can often be twisted into an enemy where Americans will see Chinese people as foreign, or as seen during the pandemic, an enemy that has brought the so-called Chinese flu. And then blue as the common bold man. We are constantly having to be bold in the face of these events. But I made this piece in thinking about the code switching that Asian Americans perform, because in different contexts, you will play up whether you want to be more Asian or more American, and you're forced into that position because of the way you look. So for example, if I am interviewing for a job, I might present as more quote unquote Asian to fulfill the idea of the model minority, that I'll be hardworking, I will put my head down and work for this company in order to get hired. But if I will be in a space with more people that are my age and my ethnicity, I will feel more at ease and be able to be myself. Or if I'm in a space where it is dominated by non-people of color, I will definitely play down my ethnicity in order to blend in and not feel as if I stand out. So this piece is thinking about the ways that all Asian Americans have to code switch in order to survive in America. But to get a little lighter and not focus on something so dark, I started making rugs recently, and you can see how my fiber practice has played out through all of these mediums. But I made these 2 rugs for friends of mine, and I didn't realize it at the time, but they are referencing the lunar zodiacs. And in thinking about that, I am trying to make something that is comforting. Like I said, I'm living away from my parents, and I think making something that is soft, something you can keep in your house, something you can use to decorate, has really been a source of comfort for me in bringing part of my culture with me to where I am now, and just thinking about ways to modernize the stories we've been told when we are children. And these are 2 other rugs I made as gifts to my parents. So the one on the left is You're the Rat, because my mom is You're the Rat, and the one on the right is You're the Dog, because my dad is You're the Dog. And then here's one I made recently, obviously for Year of the Ox. I just wanted to wish everybody an early happy Lunar New Year and say thank you so much for listening to my talk about my artwork and attending this launch party for Canto Cutie. So thank you, everybody. 多謝大家.
Thank you for sharing, Annika, and thank you again for your really amazing interview in Volume 2 and giving your time and your art and your creativity. We are now opening it up for questions for Annika about her art or anything else. Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
It's Katherine, and thanks Annika for such a neat, articulate summary of what you've been thinking about and thinking through. My name is Caitlin. I'm like a artist based in Hong Kong, and it's really lovely to see you kind of negotiate like sort of more and like full identity, because I kind of feel as if there is actually like a really complex relationship between Asians living in Asia and Asian is like a beautiful solidarity at times, and also like one that feels a lot of the time too. And I kind of wanted to like think about your dress pieces, and I kind of want to ask you about whether you have any like rituals or sort of cultural inspiration that really makes you feel like at home or feel connected to Hong Kong, because I'm always interested in seeing like what people are using to connect to Hong Kong from places that are outside here.
Thank you for your question. I think that's a really difficult question to think of off the top of my head. I think the number one thing for me that would connect me to Hong Kong is just hearing the language, and that's something I really miss not living with my parents anymore. Just because, I don't know, with all the candy and hanging up decorations is something that really makes me feel connected to Hong Kong. And I guess, I don't know, like I talked about in my piece, a lot of what I relate to Hong Kong has to do with memory and nostalgia more than active practice, especially now that I've been separated from the people that connect me most to it and the community that connects me most to it. But yeah.
Feel free to just unmute yourself at any time to ask Annika any questions. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for putting that out there.
Annika, this is Ray. In your pieces, is it like inspiration that comes to your mind? You sketch it quickly, then you create the piece. What's your source of inspiration of all these artwork?
I guess a lot of my art practice has to do with thinking about how culture can shift and change with new generations, because oftentimes, at least in American culture, Chinese culture or Asian cultures in general are placed in this position where they're put in museums and seen as static objects to be observed. But I find that a lot of diaspora people will feel as if they're performing Chinese incorrectly or performing being Cantonese incorrectly. So I want to take all these traditional objects and traditional practices and garments that I saw growing up and treat them in a way, or not treat them, but recontextualize them for the life that I'm living now, to show that one, culture can change with new generations, and two, that they can take on new meaning depending on each person. So I will usually start with an object, like a scene in this one, a specific dress, and then I will think about my relationship to that object and think about the ways I can manifest that relationship physically.
Thank you.
A question in the chat is, what led you to start making rugs?
Honestly, I saw a lot of people making it online, and because I'm still in school, I felt like I needed a creative outlet that wasn't so academically driven or academically rigorous. So I picked it up as a side hobby to relax and put my creativity in something that isn't so regimented. But it's also been a great activity for Zoom classes because it's something I can monotonously do without having to pay too much attention to it.
Hi, Annika. This is Rose. I was just wondering, how did the pandemic sort of like, do you think it changed it, like your way of presenting your textile works? Because, like your rugs and also like the fabrics, they seem to be something that's very like you can touch them and like the texture seems to be very important. And how does that change since the pandemic for you?
Thank you for your question. I feel like it's definitely been difficult because I intend for a lot of my pieces to be seen in person and touched in person. And part of my art practice before the pandemic was very performative, where I would put on the garment and walk in front of people and have people like be uncomfortable with standing right next to me. And that has definitely changed because you can only view these pieces online. But it has definitely forced me to think more about documentation and how where the piece is placed will really affect its meaning. And it's made me think about how the default documentation is often on a blank white wall, which you can see I've done in some of these works, so you can clearly see detail and stuff. But how I can shift away from that default and think more about how I can create meaning with the stuff that surrounds my work.
My favorite work that you made is Our Home Hong Kong. That's the one you originally submitted, the one that caught Z and I's eye. And I just wanted to ask a question about the title Our Home Hong Kong. I know, like, as a Cantonese American, just like you know, there's a sense of like not feeling like we haven't earned the title of calling Hong Kong our home. You know, maybe it's like appropriate for our parents or for people who are actually born there. And so there's a sense of like something that you're born into. There's no amount of work you can do to get that title. And so I'm wondering, this work, is it your voice or is it more of like a family album or a travelogue of your mom's? I'm wondering why you chose that title, Our Home Hong Kong, and how you contend with, you know, the idea of Hong Kong. Is it your home?
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I guess I would say this is more of a family log of my mom's because this is my mom's side of the family with her siblings. But I titled it Our Home because I'm tentative to say my home, and our home makes it feel like a shared experience between my mom and I, and not just something that I can completely claim by myself, because I feel similarly in that no amount of work, no amount of language that I learn, no amount of cultural learning that I do will ever earn me that title of my home. But in talking about
I'm so sorry, you cut off. You said in talking about, and then.
Oh, sorry. In talking about the relationship between my mom and I and how Hong Kong has brought us together or brought us closer together, it feels more acceptable to say our because it's a shared experience. And this piece addresses like a shared remembrance for a place that is different from the one that exists now. So it feels like we're both relating to this idealized idea of Hong Kong rather than the place it actually is now, because I feel like I would be incapable of claiming Hong Kong as the place it is now, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for all your thoughtful responses to our questions. We're going to move on to our next artist, Ro Wei. Ro Wei wrote a science fiction short story for Canto Cutie Volume 2. Ro Wei was born in Canada, raised in Hong Kong, and studies in the United Kingdom. Ro practice involves text and performance, creating rituals that narrate their mixed feelings towards their conflicting identities, thoughts, and wishes. So Ro, thank you so much for being here.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Ro, and I mean, I prefer people calling me Rose because apparently we have like a legal name and also in a name, an English name when I'm in Hong Kong. And the fisheye is sort of a project I started working on in back in 2019, and basically I got back to London, which is where I am now, after I went back to Hong Kong for summer. And then there has been a lot of things going on in Hong Kong during the summer and before and after the summer. And basically, I feel like I was standing at a very distant point because back when I was in summer, I get to actually experience and see things in person. But then after I got back to London, everything I see is based on what my friends tell me about, or social media and other internet sources. And it was kind of a project for me to visualize what's going on the other side of the world. And that's why I wrote this story. And it's basically talking about a dystopia, which is controlled by a religion. And they basically, the religion prays to the Pearl of Orient and over control citizens on what they're allowed to or not allowed to do. And since then, disasters have been going on and strange phenomena has been occurring in the city. And I've written 7 stories of 7 anons, and they basically are trying to fight against this religion. And I'm going to read the last passage, the last story of my work, because I felt like it's something that encourages me, and as well as many other Hong Kong people. Anon looked at the figure in front of him in disbelief. He wasn't sure if he was hallucinating. "Aren't you dead?" "I am, but not really. I live as a memory in the minds of everyone who remembers." The portal was quickly disrupted, no longer connecting the worlds together. The parallel universe for the souls of the deceased had once again left Anon to face reality alone. There came a moment of disappointment, but Anon was also overwhelmed by the fact that somewhere, light years away perhaps, people who were long gone were still there, with him. He wondered if it meant that events were destined to happen. Perhaps there is a regularity of all life. Nothing is coincidental. The breakdown of the city could have been an inevitable process, a Mobius loop that connected them to the new fantasy. If the eyes were meant to spy, and the catastrophes were meant to happen, what would be created to lead us through? Bang, bang. Anon snapped out of his thoughts. The eyes had initiated the cleansing ceremony. There was no time for Anon to think about anything else. Red and blue light swirled around, aggressively taking over every single inch of space illuminated. The air expanded and compressed under the contrasting hues. Apparently, the area was in lockdown. Anon must seek shelter before the eyes spot him. He must retain Anon. Should Anon flee, though? Could he possibly stay? Would there be somewhere out there willing to accept him? Would there be places without the eyes? What if there's nothing left out there? Would he be left alone forever? Anon chuckled in despair. We might not live to see the future of the metropolis, and we might never reach utopia. We might struggle to trust each other, and we might struggle to stay alive. In the end, regardless of the insurmountable fear and hopelessness, we will overcome. The end. I think that's it.
Thank you so much for reading from your short story. We will now open it up to questions for Rose.
Oh, this is Ray. Rose, in creating this story, do you have a plot, a script? How do you envision the story? Do you have a beginning and end, or just a free-flowing style?
I started off with some of the events that had been occurring in Hong Kong, and then it's based on like really scattered ideas, but then at the same time, I think it's all right for them to be scattered around because the story was written in a non-chronological order anyways, and basically it's just a lot of things going on, and I work on bits of this and that and sort of merge them together in the end.
Thank you.
This is Annika. So if you work on it every now and then, do you have an idea for where the final destination is, or are you working on it actively as events actively unfold and you're going to see where it goes?
I sort of stopped editing it at the moment because of basically things have been changing quite differently, and like the pandemic came, and then there were also like basically protests in Hong Kong were kind of being more underground now, and now that like it's not something that's easily spoken out, I started writing bits of others that are not in the story, but then it's still inspired and like related, and it's sort of like an ongoing process for myself, but not for the story. It's kind of like here for now.
So the story is basically a allegory to what happened in Hong Kong in 2019 in the multiple colleges. The actual protest that actually happened on campus, and everything was a mess, and it was really scary. And some of the scenes I thought had like a certain sense of visceral realism to it. And did you have friends that were kind of in those like really risky situations that like shared their experiences with you? Or like, I'm just curious because I thought it was really realistic the way it was written.
I don't have friends that were in the campus when the like the things were happening in the campus, but then I had friends who were actively going out and also like having the risk of being arrested and stuff. And then there were also a lot of footages as well as reports that's like basically giving me the details. And I would say a lot of them are kind of my interpretation when I was in London rather than actual experiences of my friends. But then it's just the way I see it in a very like distance position. Yeah.
Cool.
Rose. Oh, sorry. Is someone else speaking right now? No?
I don't think so.
Okay. Hi. I appreciate you writing about distance during these like the political turmoil. I was also kind of like in and out of Hong Kong, and I felt that was a moment. I never really thought critically about news media before that as like a Hong Konger. I just like have certain apps that I read. And then like during that time, specifically during that crisis, reading about the way things were being framed and unfolded, it was kind of making me realize that there's like a lot of like media is obviously, I mean, biased, but I mean, I didn't realize a lot of media had certain stakes in painting certain narratives about Hong Kong. And as someone actually like from here and like here, it felt really distressing. So I wanted to ask, like, in your creative writing, how do you like transform the kind of like cliches of how the media is now framing Hong Kong as like dead and calling like Hong Kong has like died? And I feel like the way that you like the sentiment that your stories are showing when I was reading the zine is like much more like regenerative and like creative and hopeful and resourceful, because like, and I could, it's weird, I felt like I could relate more to your stories and like what like really major newspapers are writing about Hong Kong, because I just kind of feel like it communicates how some of us actually feel here, which is that of course we want to keep living, like just because certain things are happening here, like we're not all just like something gonna die, like we have to like forge new realities here. So I kind of wanted to ask you about like hope in your stories, and also how you take certain media framings and you rethink the narrative in your creative writing.
Thank you for asking, because basically I don't I'm actually working in fine art, so I don't really like my creative writings are usually put into my practices in terms of performance or like merging with other media when I'm presenting it. And to me, I feel like the process of writing is a performance for myself to generate this kind of hope and giving me myself sort of sort of like the performance is giving me a sort of hope for me to kind of look at what's going on in Hong Kong, as well as like basically other things that are going on at the same time. And I guess when it comes to like reading the news, it's just because my parents hold a very different political view with me, and our ways of kind of communicating with each other is actually like listening to each other's view, even though we still disagree with each other. But then I guess the process of me arguing with my parents, it's also a way of reflecting, of like critically thinking if the news is something that's reliable, or like it's something that would like we should totally listen to, or is there something else we need to focus on? I guess I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rose, again for reading from your piece, and thank you for all your thoughtful responses to everyone. We are now going to look at the poetry of Raymond Chong. Like I mentioned, Raymond was featured in Volume 1 as well. He is the president of Generations LLC, his creative enterprise in Sugar Land, Texas. He's a writer of stories, composer of poems, director of films, and lyricist of songs. Raymond is also a civil engineer, a traffic operations engineer, a professional transportation planner, and a road safety professional. Here is Raymond.
Well, thank you, Ms. Katherine. And from Texas, howdy, you all. Well, I'm here, my second round, and I thank Katherine and Say put this opportunity to recite my poem Unto the Sunlight Aurora, and give a little background. From an enchanted voyage across a mystical land of Cathay, an intense Cantonese gentleman tells a romantic tryst with a bewitching lady, a peony from the ancient capital of Kaifeng, by the Yellow River, unto the sunrise. Now, my poem. Unto the sunlight aurora, once upon an aeon, midst an enchanting summer, at mystical Cathay, from Beijing, the Forbidden City, to Shanghai, Pearl of the Orient, to Huangwang, ancient Phoenix town, a creamy peony of dreamy allure, from the ancient city of chrysanthemums, by the serpentine Honghe, utterly infatuates my desires. When you entirely captivate me by your glossy lips, by your milky peaks, by your spicy scent. As we nightly enrapture within the crimson chamber. As my stony jade stock embeds your dewy jade gate, with your glaze high tide of yin, and with my honey high tide of yang, amid our sultry inferno, when you and me seductively shear with our misty gasp in our teary blazes, until the sunlit aurora. And
Thank you so much, Raymond, for reading your poem. We will now open it up for questions. I'm wondering if you have someone in mind as you write this poem. It's very clearly very sensual. Or is it more of like an essence of a person or an idea? I'd love to know more about your process.
this is inspired by a true life event a few years ago. And this reflects that time with that particular lady in China. And this is my story of that voyage across Cathay at that time, in that summer. So it's true to life. It's more impassioned, more vivid, more inspired by true events.
May I ask if in some ways your poem is a response to the fact that Asian American men are often desexualized and demasculated in popular culture, and there's something that's very like strong in the energy about this poem, where you're just sort of like stating your desires in a poetic way, but in a way that's also like not ashamed, which I do think is kind of making me realize that a lot of expressions of sensual desire in Asian culture, more broadly in English, are like sort of like cloaked in a lot of shame. And this poem doesn't feel to like have any of that.
Well, in my case, I'm ABC, American born Chinese, and you're right about the Chinese DNA of the men culture, the way we're taught to be silent, quiet, be very discreet in the way we think. But based on my interest in entertainment and creativity, I realized I had to add more metaphors, more passion into the way I talk, the way I chat. And it's been an evolution to where I am now. And to be very sensual, very sexual, very lively in this tone, in my mind, is quite rare from a male perspective. Even for an American man, I paint a picture of a situation that goes from a beginning to an end, whether it's the sun or a moon. So I add a lot of vivid words into this style of my poetry writing. And it's inspired by true events, by whether I'm in China or in America. It's more authentic, more real. And just take a note. I say the ancient city of Chrysanthemums, I'm referring to the Kaifeng. So I'm trying to convey that imagery of that city at that time. Kaifeng was the ancient capital of China centuries ago. Dreamy peony reflects the flower, the lady. She is my peony. So this is the metaphors I try to embed in my poems.
How do audiences usually react to your poetry? And does it differ whether or not, is it Asian American, American? How do their reactions differ, if there is any, in your experience?
It's a good question, Miss Katherine. I actually rehearsed this poem to an all-American group. Yesterday, Toastmasters, I'm a member of Toastmasters, and they really like it because it was very expressive, romantic. It tells a story. So the response is very positive. It's very unusual too, the way I create a love story in a sense. Imagery, the earth, the moon, the sun, the place, the moment. So you as the audience, you as the listener are there with me in that voyage across China. So I try to convey reality to that. So from the what we call the American audience, it's been very positive. For Chinese, I'm not sure yet because to be fair enough, Chinese are we call it indirect, subtle, and discreet. So if I was to convey this in the Chinese terms, it'd be vulgar and overblown. So I'm trying to balance it between China and America.
I'm curious when you say sorry, this is Annika. When presenting your work to a Chinese audience, would you translate this poem into Chinese? And if you were to translate it into Chinese, would you change it to be more subtle and I guess, I don't know, understated, or would you purposely make it the same in English and be more forward with the intention?
From my perspective, I would translate it exactly from English to Chinese in the way that I have written it. And I know from English to Chinese, it's an art to translate the adjectives, the verbs, the actions. So it's for myself, my preference is to be direct and be bold about it because that's who I am. I don't want to color myself as yellowash, where I am really whitewash in one way, but now do I want to be yellowash in the other way? So I want to be who I am, authentic.
Thank you so much for reading to us, Raymond, and thank you everyone for participating. The next presentation we have is from Kristie Song. Kristie has both a graphic and a short story in Volume 2. Kristie is a Chinese-American writer based in Southern California. She also works with audio and digital art to tell meaningful stories about lost memories and childhood scraps. Here is Kristie.
Thank you for the introduction, Katherine, and thank you everyone else for being here. For my graphic, it's basically an illustrative reconstruction of my relationship with my mother, who is the Cantonese part of my heritage. My father is from northern China, so my art and writing that deals with my Cantonese identity usually deals with how I'm grappling with it. And so this specific art piece is just how it gets a bit personal into family life and relationships, but I haven't always felt really close to my mother. And so that's why there's that missing hole in that original family portrait depicted there. And the ripped out piece is her. It's what I reimagined her as a child. And so that's the art piece. And for my short story, it's more in a line with my personal experiences of not really feeling like I fully fit into the Cantonese identity. And this has been touched on a lot with the other artists today. I really resonated with Annika when she spoke on how it can feel kind of performative when it comes to expressing our Cantonese identity. And so for me, because my only link to my Cantonese heritage is my mother and my mother's side, the only times that we really were able to connect was on our weekend dim sum brunches together. And so it almost felt like being Cantonese was a skin that I would take on for the weekends, and then I would shed it right off during the weekdays because there wasn't any other real connection to the language or the people and the culture. So I'll read you my story and then maybe talk a bit more about it. It's called Eating Siu Mai Doesn't Make You Cantonese. As a kid, the highlight of every week was Sunday morning dim sum with my maternal grandparents, Gong Gong and Po Po. We'd carpool to restaurants with names like 88 Seafood House, grand places that looked like banquet halls, each filled from corner to corner with large oval tables draped in the same thick off-white linen. Gong Gong always marched in, cutting past hostesses in clean black uniforms calling out numbers, through the clangs of teacups and chopsticks, and straight to the restaurant manager. He seemed to be chummy with each one, and we'd be seated at once, to the dismay of families gripping their numbers with clenched white fists. Then, stout middle-aged women pushing steel carts would bark their goods at us. Pineapple bun, do you want it? Do you want them cut? Gong Gong would only offer a nod or shake of the head, his gaze swimming in the small porcelain teacup near his folded hands. And so was the rhythm of our mornings, stern women coming and going, Gong Gong nodding or scowling, the table filling and emptying with small steel steamers. Dad liked to gnaw on chicken feet, making sucking noises while he crunched on the small bones. Mom liked anything wrapped in dough, but she often ate in silence because Gong Gong made her nervous. This was something I learned later on. I'd eye the carts, hoping each new auntie would have my favorite, siu mai. And when it would arrive, I made sure my thank you was bright and proper, mgoi sai. Usually there was no response. She would place her little red stamp onto our card, which would be littered with the same red stamps by the end of the meal, and then move on to the next table. But I felt victorious, a well-mannered Cantonese kid who sounds like her mother, like her grandparents. Thank you rolled off the tongue, its intonations practiced and carefully executed. But Gong Gong and Po Po rarely spoke to me in Cantonese. This was reserved for my mother, her sisters, her brother, and their children, not me. To them, my mother had made the mistake of marrying a mainlander, my father with a sharp nose and wooden tongue. He spoke Putonghua, or Mandarin Chinese, the dialect my mother had to learn to converse with him when they first began dating. This was not the language of her home. I am his reflection, the same broad shoulders, deep under eye circles, strong nose bridge. It didn't matter how practiced my mgoi sai was, or how I have my mother's eyes and freckles. So that's the story, and looking back on it now retrospectively, I feel like it has a lot to do with my relationship with being Cantonese and my inability to express myself through the language, because I feel like most people do, and I rely on language to express myself and to really show and pinpoint what I'm feeling and how I can communicate that with other people and share meaningful moments and specific things that are a part of us. And so because I wasn't able to do that with my family, it just really emphasized how disconnected I felt to being Cantonese. But through writing this piece and also through more illustrative work, I feel like regardless of my poor Cantonese skills or my inability to really connect with my family, regardless, I'm still Cantonese, and through more expression, I feel like I can connect with that closer and closer and build community through that. So, thank you.
We will now open it up for questions. Thank you so much, Kristie, for reading.
Kristie, this is Ray. I love your story. It just reminds me of my sweet time with my my gong gong in particular. So it just brings me fond memories of those days many years ago, and the dim sum. Oh boy, you're very vivid. I can taste it right now. So I compliment you being so authentic in your thoughts and feelings.
Thank you so much, Raymond.
I have a question. You mentioned, like, in the end, after you read your story, you said that you feel like because you're not proficient in Cantonese, that you feel like you can't express how you feel with your family, or, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but I feel like I'm bilingual, and like I feel like Cantonese doesn't really allow me the emotional range as much as English does, and I feel like I can't really it's different to say I love you in Cantonese than it is in English. And also, like, the different range of I love yous that you can say in English is, I feel like it's more available to me than, like, I mean, people in Cantonese don't even say I love you, honestly. Like, you rarely hear someone say oh like that's so corny. Like, you don't do that. I just feel like, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm just having some woes as like a bilingual, like in both proficient in both of the languages, but like, yeah, I don't know how much not being proficient in Cantonese really limit, you know, that emotional exchange with family, because I am proficient. But at the same time, I find that when I'm talking in Cantonese with my family, emotion is not really up in the forefront, you know. It's talking about the other things that express how we're concerned about each other. Like, rarely would I actually express how I feel with like emotional terminology, like in therapy, like to my family. Like, I would try, but like it's different. It's like people say that like bilingual people are like two different people in different languages. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've ever heard that, but
No, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I agree, and hearing your experiences, Z, and also people in the chat who, even though they're fluent in Cantonese, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're closer to communicating certain things to their family members. And I always thought that was the biggest limiting factor in talking to my grandparents specifically, because I thought that fluency in our conversation would mean that we would instantly be able to talk about anything we wanted to. But even though I am a lot more fluent in Mandarin, and so when I talk to my dad, our conversations don't always dip because of fluency, but we aren't always able to reach that emotional point where we can really speak honestly about things that are heavy on our minds. And so, I don't know, when I think more about my Cantonese grandparents, whenever I would try to speak with them in Cantonese, they would automatically just switch to Mandarin because they thought that because I knew more of that, then we would be able to speak in that way. But for me, it almost felt like a dismissal, like, oh, you can't even speak Cantonese, so we're not even going to try. We're just going to switch to something else that seems easier. And I kind of wish that they pushed more to try to use Cantonese with me. But then again, like, communication is so wacky sometimes, and we really have difficulties with that. And so I'm not trying to pin it on my grandparents to like try to use the language more with me. But yeah, it is difficult. And I guess it's also an added layer of cultural barriers because it is hard to talk about like the more gushy parts of ourselves and express love specifically, like what you said about how it feels corny to say I love you in Cantonese. And so I found ways that my parents and my family express their love through acts of service, things like that. I remember my popo would come to our house on the weekends if we didn't go to dim sum, and she would just sit on a chair and she'd bring these like fresh apples and she would just peel them all and like chop them all up and give them to us. And so it's these physical manifestations of love, I feel, that are more, I guess, like open when it comes to being Cantonese and Chinese to showing our love, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Kristie, for reading from your story, and thank you everyone for your questions. We will move to our last performance of the night. Karen Leung. Karen is a writer and poet and self-proclaimed Canto Cutie who has stubbornly clung to her honky status despite her garbled Chinese. She regretfully only writes in the colonizer's language, but may one day be able to wield her mother tongue with more ease. Her works mainly involve Hong Kong, women of color, and her lived experience in straddling both identities. In her spare time, she writes, scrapbooks, and waxes poetic about being an Aries. She is published in Zanny, Doof magazine, and now Canto Cutie. Here is Karen.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me. I don't know if it's a little bit loud because I'm currently outdoors, but if you can't hear me, I've written a very short excerpt which I will put in the chat box now, which sort of touches in on my works and what I was trying to talk about. And I think that the majority of what I had written and I had submitted for this edition sort of had to deal with grappling, as many of you have spoken about already, being from and identifying as a Hong Konger, but having certain barriers to doing that. And I found that to be true for myself, even though I was privileged and lucky enough to grow up most of my life in Hong Kong at an international school. And I think that barrier came to be even more prominent when I came back during the pandemic, and being uniquely confronted with how I had lived in a more insulated bubble of Hong Kong and how that played into both the pandemic and the political situation at the same time. So my piece, Day Go By, I had written when I first finished my quarantine in Hong Kong, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of love and connection for everyone on the street. Like, it wasn't a particular site that grabbed my eye, it wasn't a particular event. It was just people congregating in and out at Central, where people congregating in and out at Central, being busy, being loud, being aggressive. And I just felt this like radiating sense of belonging. And this was sort of my poem about that. So I'm just going to read that, and I'm open to hearing your discussions and your questions. But yes, please, table for two. I am keening for this lovely mirage of normality. My tenderness is a flesh wound, and the city opens its legs. When there is an opening, we take it. Whomst has had enough of unprecedented times. Feet thundering past Central, a collective sigh. We are moored. We are moored. Yeah, so that's my poem. Thank you guys so much for allowing me the time and space to be here. Yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Or if you can't hear me, I can respond in the chat box.
We will now open for questions for Karen. Thank you so much for reading.
Yeah, this is Ray. Miss Karen, when you compose your poetry, are you thinking in Chinese first, then in English, or you just do it right into English naturally? I'm just curious in your creative approach.
It comes to me in English first. If it feels right and it feels organic, I will try and incorporate some Chinese into my work. But for most of it does come to me in English first.
Thank you.
Hi, Caitlin. Also, I really like your graphics and your art. Sorry to have a fangirling moment, but I really, really love your work about Hong Kong. My favorite thing about growing up into an international school was I really, really my younger sister went to a local school. She went to DPS, which I don't know if a lot of you know it, but that is pretty much the most straight-laced local school you could get in Hong Kong. So I appreciate that it fostered at least a sense of independent and critical thinking. That was probably my favorite takeaway from international school. But I went to a Christian international school, and my least favorite part was the homophobia, sexism, slut shaming, and the white supremacy. So definitely a mixed bag, but I am really, really grateful for the fact that it allowed me to weaponize the fact that I know how to like use this language, and I can position and pivot myself in a way where people in local school did not have this opportunity, or they had to fight twice as hard for the scraps and the crumbs, because innately to grow up in an international school in Hong Kong means that you are from like a doctored and privileged background. And obviously with the pandemic and the socio-political situation, I feel like that's changing, and it's finally getting the attention it deserves, that like these are like kind of pockets of privilege in Hong Kong, and very white dominated spaces. So I think having this conversation is really important, and I'm really, really grateful that I lived through it, so that I can now take a step back and see sort of like things that went well and things that just were completely unseemly.
Just like Erin, I'm really captivated by the language you used. I'm wondering if you could explain more about this line that really has captured me. Holmes has had enough of unprecedented times. Feet thundering past Central, a collective sigh. We are moored, we are moored. That is a line that really jumps out at me, just like it does for a lot of the readers. Can you talk more about your inspiration, or what was going through your mind as you wrote that?
Yeah, I'm really happy that this was a piece that a lot of people liked. I think for a lot of poets and writers, usually there are pieces that take a lot of time to sort of look at again and like nitpick at, but this was one of the few pieces for me where I wrote it and I was just happy with it. I felt really sated and at peace with what I, just scribbled out, and this was the end product. And the we are moored and like the repetition of that is just almost like a reflection for me on how chaos and normality was so precious to Hong Kong people. Like the chance to embark and return to some form of normality. And in Central, where like this is like the main hub um, of where a lot of people gathered, and people getting to return to work, people getting to meet again. I felt like that was so important, and that's so tethered to what Hong Kongers really wanted, which was stability. So that to me was why I wanted to really reiterate that as much as I could. Yeah. I see Tsu's point, and I do agree as well. I think that what I meant was English was the foundational edifice that colonizers used originally, especially in a place like Hong Kong, where it is the currency to get you from place A to place B, career-wise, financially, blah, blah, blah. I think that is changing, and I think especially now that reclamation of it is so important. And it's the same, you know, like with Hong Kong people and like slang and like, you know, pardon my French, but like Dieu-les-Lomo, you know, and like DLLM is such like a very characteristically Cantonese thing. And I think that with English, when people like us meet and like we congregate and we post works that are written in English, meant for English speakers, it shifts the position that even though this was like the conditions of existence we had, we can use that to maneuver ourselves more and to continue to like unlearn and create more. So I definitely agree with what's saying, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen, for reading your poem.